What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso, joined as always by Connor Rogers. Bonus midweek pod. There hasn't been a ton of action. There's been a few signings, which Connor and myself are going to talk through. We're going to talk through that, the panic, the comp pick structure, and answer some of your Discord questions. And we're just going to riff because CR, we're in that Discord and we're on Twitter, and it's ugly hours out there from from an enthusiasm standpoint. But how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm good, man. We go through this every year. I was laughing in the Discord. You're what? You get 48 hours in, and you look at what's left of the market, and it gets worse every year because teams are smarter, they're more analytical, they have cap specific people. There's less guys getting to market that shouldn't be getting to market, right? So good investments. So what that happens with that is, it's so easy to explain like this. Bad players get paid like average players. Average players get paid like good players, and good players get paid like the best in the NFL. Like if you just Google, like Dan Moore Jr. gets signed to be the left tackle of the Titans. Average left tackle.
Yep.
He's now in the bracket sitting next to the Jordan Mailatas and ahead of Lane Johnson. And he's like the 8th highest paid tackle in the league. So Javon Kinlaw is a $15 million player. Okay.
I still can't wrap my head around that one. And we'll talk about it more in the comp pick section. But oh my God, he was terrible last year.
Terrible.
Your boy Newmark, he's getting revenge on you, I guess.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it. That'll make you look smart. It's just, so, and I'm not, taking a dump on free agency here, because the Jets often are partaking in free agency because they have a lot of needs. And I'm not saying, I put it like this. If by the end of free agency, the Jets don't have another receiver on this roster, don't have a capable defensive tackle on this roster, they didn't do their job, right? But it is funny how the reactions are like this. And then 2 years later, we're counting the 5 void years on CJ Uzama's deal. Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's the thing, is you're often, for a shot in the arm, you're making long-term bad choices more often than not. And there's also a lot of good, there's ways they've operated that I like, I guess, just to jump right into it. Like Cisco is the perfect buy low candidate.
Yes.
He's 24 years old. He has a skill set the Jets really haven't had since Kerry Rhodes was here, that free roaming safety on the back end. He'll have some of the best DB coaching he could ever ask for here. He was a good player for multiple years. He's just coming off he picked a bad year to have a bad year. And when you look at Jacksonville,
terrible situation.
There's no player that you look at and go, well, that guy was fine. And it was just a disaster. So that's a buy low scenario, and no 1-year deal is a bad deal. Besides Javon Kinlaw, that was a bad 1-year deal. So then you look, we'll get into Stevens a little bit, because that's the contract I haven't really wrapped my head around in fully processing the number with it. It's just and then Fields is obviously a little easier to process because it's a quarterback with some upside, and he's a starting quarterback. Even if he's not a good starting quarterback right now, he can play his way into being at 1 or average or whatever it is. So it's just, you don't want to find yourself in the rat race of the market, like having to do what some of these teams did. They're paying safeties as $20 million safeties that are not some of the best safeties in the league. It just kind of enhances that you need to draft your own players. And should I do the compensatory pick thing now?
Let's get into it, because we've been calling you Comp Rogers in the group chat, because this is your operating theory that if you were a GM, you'd be doing a lot of what Muji is doing right now. But talk through the calculations in your head and why this makes sense and why it does matter for the Jets.
So, to start at the absolute bottom here, because compensatory picks are now, coaches and execs are in this, we've seen, but really at the heart of it too is obviously players leaving in free agency based on players that their deal expired with you, not who you cut. If you cut a guy, he's not in the formula. If you sign a guy that was cut, like Dalvin Tomlinson's out there, he's not in the formula against you. So it not only enhances you signing your own guys, because then they're not hurting your comp pick formula, but it also is an enhancement to go out there and sign the guys that don't factor in, that were cut. The guys that just make it to free agency on expiring deals, that's the guys that factor in. Now, the Jets always two factors into why the Jets never get compensatory picks. One, they don't have good players that walk because they often don't have enough good players. Two, that they often have to spend enough money that even when they lose a decent player, it cancels out. So when you look at the Jets chart right now, and over the cap lays out a really good way of doing this. Look at it like this. And Kinlaw probably surprised them. They probably didn't think Kinlaw. It goes by your annual average per year salary. And some other factors are going to go into it throughout the year. But at its base right now, the average salary per year. So DJ Reed, we knew was going to get a big contract. Yep. DJ Reed got $16 million a year. So that would count as the fourth round tier. It goes by tiers of third round picks, the highest guys. Like the Vikings will probably get a third round pick for the contract Darnold's got. The Eagles will probably get a third round pick for the contract Milton Williams got. If you lose a premium guy, or you could look at it like the Vikings get Daniel Jones counts on their comp pick formula. So he got $14 million. They're going to, that's a big part of their formula. So there's teams that play it the right way. So DJ Reed and Justin Fields, 16 mil, 20 mil, they cancel each other out. So the Jets won't get that 4 for Reed because they signed Fields. Now, Javon Kinlaw at 15 mil, he's a guy that would range around a 5th round pick. But the Jets signed Brandon Stevens to 12 mil, which surprised me. I thought that was a rich market for him. Those cancel out. Morgan Moses gets 8 mil. Cisco got 10. They cancel out. So the Jets won't get that 6th or 5th round pick, whatever that would be. But Hassan Reddick got $14 million. That's a projected 4th round pick that the Jets have not canceled out yet. So if you went out there and gave, I'm trying to think of somebody that's still on the market, Calais Campbell, $14 million, then you'd probably lose that 4th round pick. The Jets might still make a move and none of this matters. But my thought process here is, by the way, Solomon Thomas at $4 million could get them a 7th round pick. I don't think they care about that one. They'll probably make a move that cancels that one out. But the reality is they probably want that 4th rounder for Reddick and don't see somebody left on the market because the market's terrible right now. And it was bad coming into the offseason, but now it's worse when it's depleted. They're probably like, that guy's worth it. We'd rather have the 4th round pick next year in a draft that maybe you're moving up to try to get a quarterback. So all assets matter. So the comp pick formula, it's more complicated than that, but that's the most basic way to play it. And this is something that I would think this new regime wants to be a part of in a year that the free agency class wasn't great and they weren't going to go nuts in free agency because they're not getting fired if they suck this year. So, and I don't think the Jets are going to suck this year, but I didn't think they had to act like the Giants and Joe Shane over there and be crazy or like Joe Douglas acted the last 2 years. So I think that's an underlying factor where I think the guys they go after that'll get big numbers are guys that were cut. Or if Conklin gets a big deal from someone and now they have another big pick on their lap because somebody gave Tyler Conklin $10 million a year. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. It's not just Darren Muji's asleep or he froze. Like they're trying to actually be calculated in how they operate free agency in and out.
It's the difference between a first-year GM and a GM who's going to be fired next year, which is right. The Giants GM. Spoiler. I'm happy to make a wager on that. What has also been interesting, and I think debatable to see, is we got the official word on Rodgers today, right? So they're going to spread the money over 2 years. There's also, and I don't believe they can do this because I think you can only designate one player for it. CJ Mosley also going to be released, and I think Rich Cimini initially tweeted they could do a post June 1st designation for him. Either way, it seems like the Jets are kind of spreading the pain out or angling towards spreading the pain out over 2 years, which you could debate the tactics of doing that. And there are many things that could go into that from a cash flow perspective to how they're looking at how they're going to handle each prospective offseason as they look to build. I just think worth a couple minutes on the decision to do that. And quick thoughts to put a full bow on Rodgers and Mosley. I think with Rodgers, he'll probably end up in Pittsburgh would be my guess. I'd be surprised if he goes somewhere else if he doesn't decide to retire. I think the last I saw, he was walking the beaches in a blanket and someone was tweeting about it. We're past all that now.
Apparently he's not communicating with the Giants and the Steelers right now. Like that just came in as we were recording.
Yeah, I mean, this is like as I see the different like tweets and other chatter about it, it's like the ultimate forgetting Sarah Marshall meme. Like it's like The Sopranos, it's over, find a new show. Now I can't say that because I tweet and share Sopranos gifs 40 times a day, but that's the point. Like it's over, and I think the way I've summed this up, the way we'll remember it is that it was a reasonable Hail Mary that a desperate head coach and GM threw after they failed on Zach Wilson, and the whole thing blew up in week 1 of the 2023 season. And the Jets were never able to recover from that. And then with Mosley, I think what was a crazy thing, like Mosley spent more time with the Jets than the Ravens, which is like wild in my mind when you think about it. And Mosley, great leader. I think you could give him a lot of credit for what's happened with Quincy and Sherwood's career. I do think it was time, though. And I think with where you're at roster-wise now, it's not surprising at all to me that they're moving on from him. So what are your final words on those two dudes and the Jets' financial strategy of how they're handling that? And I know it was a question you and Will were trying to yell at Muji in Indy, but what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll move on to the 4 guys the Jets did sign today.
Who'd you mention before Mosley?
Rodgers. Now it's like officially over. He got cut.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so burnt out by it. It's like when my mom calls me every week and she's asked me if I've watched Enigma yet. And I'm just like, she's been doing that basically since the season ended because she loved it. And I would just like, honestly, no. Like my whole year was spent, when you're sitting on that desk looking at your monitor, listening to every word of every presser during that kind of season. I don't have any like ill will towards Rodgers. It didn't work. He got hurt. He wasn't very good this year. It was chaotic at times, but I don't think it was turbulent enough. I don't look at it like 2016, the Fitz year. Holy shit, do we hate that year? It's not a fun year to look back on though. So it's not really a fun time to look back on. They tried it. It didn't work. I think Rodgers gave it his all. He made bad decisions. Like the players he brought with him in year 1 stunk. The coaches he brought with him stunk. He got old and got hurt, and that's life. And he tried really hard. He rehabbed really hard, and it just didn't work. Like it's. So I don't look back and go like I won't watch football this year and root against Aaron Rodgers or have that internal feeling, even if I don't admit it. But I won't look back at it and be like, I don't know, fond memories. It's just it feels like a lot of nothing, which is bizarre for such a polarizing figure. I guess it's just because I look at everything in such a football lens too deep sometimes with this Jets team. Mosley is a good example of someone that like he really, really did so much behind the scenes, I think, for the organization, developing young players, keeping a locker room in check during times where there wasn't a lot of reliability. His body failed him at times here, which is a shame. It really failed him at the end. He had some bad luck in the beginning. He was a solid player that just, you have nothing but respect for. And like you said, Joe, it had a lingering effect on those young players. So it's an end of an era for each, but unfortunately, and this isn't Mosley's fault, when you think of him, you kind of think of the Gase era and the solid years where the defense was just out there doing everything they can to gut this team across the finish line in games. And when you think of Rodgers, you just think of what could have been and how much that swing really ended up missing, unfortunately. And it's kind of time. I guess another thing, too, I look at with those guys, and I don't think it's their fault, but with all the money they paid Mosley, it was like they were looking for a hero on the defense.
Yeah.
And then when he got hurt, you saw the bottom fall out. With Rodgers, they were looking for a hero on offense. And I feel like the mission of Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, which is going to be hard, like it's easier said than done, but they want to build a football team. There's going to be no me. There's going to be no like, oh, this guy got hurt and now we're screwed. It might not work, but it just feels like they're so far away from how those regimes operated. And stars matter in this league, but I've said this for a long time. The Jets don't need a lot of stars right now. They have some stars. They need a football team, and they need a team that's coached, and they need depth. And I think that's going to be kind of the mission of these guys. And I'm kind of looking forward to that, kind of that era turning the page.
So the transactions today, and I'll go through them in order of what I think were the most intriguing / encouraging to the most, I guess, head scratching. Although at this money, it's hard to get too worked up about anything. So they signed Josh Myers, a starting center, a guy who has experience with Justin Fields, played with him at Ohio State. I think the initial reaction to this, that's 1 year, $3.5 million. The initial reaction, and we have to take some blame of being part of this conversation, is they're going to play Myers at center, they're going to move Tittman to guard, and they're going to move AVT to right tackle. And we're back to offensive line Tetris. Now, I look at this, And I see that they're paying Myers to be their top interior offensive line backup, which makes sense because they've struggled in that role with Wes Schweitzer the last 2 years because he's constantly been hurt.
Always.
Myers, could start. I think in an emergency, it gives you that Tetris option, but I don't get why you would take a guy like Joe Tippmann, who was excellent last year in his second year and his first full year as a starter, and then immediately move his position. They could do that. It's a new offensive line coach. It's a new offensive coordinator. It's a new coaching staff. And they might say, look, we think we got really good value with this guy. He could start at center. We know Tippmann can play guard, and AVT is our right tackle. And we agree with you guys and many other Jet fans out there that that's a more valuable position and he can do it. Or what I think it is he's a good player. It's 1 year. It's $3 million. A good player by being a backup. With a lot of starting experience. And, we can still take a right tackle at 7. We might not. We're not showing our cards either way. But this to me is this is a good, we need backup offensive linemen who aren't Max Mitchell and Xavier Newman type signing. So good on the Jets for making this addition.
Yeah.
And the fact that he played with Fields, even better. That there's no downside to that. The second one, and then we'll hit the last two. They just brought Isaiah Oliver back. There's nothing exciting there, but he's
solid,
fine backup, right? Could play corner, could play safety, and could play special teams. Totally fine as a backup. So what are your thoughts on Myers and the offensive line Tetris? And then we'll get to the other two signings.
Well, it's adequate depth because they're signing depth that started a lot of games in Myers, and I know we're going to talk about Chukwuma Okorafor, who's played a lot of games at tackle for the Steelers. These I equated this in the Discord to when in December a team signs a number 7 starting pitcher, and that guy is going to be on the mound for your team at some point because baseball teams go through arms like nothing in this era. But the reaction from the fan base is always great, this guy's our number 3 starter because it's the guy signed. And at the end of the day, when the offseason's done, it's oh, actually he's the number 6 or number 7. Okorafor and Myers are adequate depth. That's what they are. Myers, like you said, Joe, is somebody that could start if you need him to and get you by for a couple games. Think about the situations the Jets have been put in with these spots where Xavier Newman, who credit to him, but as a UDFA, he was barely an NFLer when he had to play key reps for the Jets.
Place that ball against the Giants, though. We'll always live in infamy for that.
Yeah, it was a great moment of his life. Yeah. Carter Warren has not looked like an NFL tackle.
Nah.
And I know I'm kind of getting ahead of my skis here because we were going to talk about these two guys first, but I kind of want to blend them together. Okorafor, it's funny, the reaction, this is the recency bias we live in. Everyone's oh, he's the guy that had, 12 terrible snaps to the Patriots and then quit on the team. Don't get me wrong. That's something they got to figure out character-wise what went on there. But are we just ignoring from 2020 to 2022, he played over 1,100 snaps all 3 of those seasons for the Steelers at tackle, and he was just solid. Not good, not great. I texted my buddy John Ledyard, who has watched every snap of the Steelers, I feel the last 20 years. And he's brutally honest on players. So there's the perfect person to text. I was he is going to kill this guy. And right away, he was honestly, he was an okay starter. He was better than Broderick Jones and more for us. He talked about how last year it feels like things fell apart, with New England. And
maybe there's personal stuff going on that we don't know about. Maybe he just hated that terrible coaching staff and organization.
And he was playing left tackle for them. Most of his games for the Steelers was at right tackle. He's a adequate swing tackle. That's what he is. Your starting tackle gets hurt. Can he get you by for a couple games and you could hide him and he's just fine? That's what he's been. I get why people are oh, this guy stinks. New England, blah, blah, blah. If you started NFL games for 6 years at tackle for the Steelers, it's not it was for Jacksonville. You can't just be a total scrub. So I get why I think people are having a problem with this because the Jets don't have a right tackle right now. And if out of the gate, Okorafor is the starting right tackle for this team expected to play all 17 games, that's not ideal. That would be problematic to me. But it's day 2 of free agency where if he's the backup tackle, here's how you grade it. He's a upgrade over Carter Warren, and it's not particularly close. Josh Myers is an upgrade over what they've had as backup interior lineman, and it's not particularly close. Depth on the offensive line matters so much, just like your number 6, 7, and 8 starters in baseball. So I'm not celebrating these signings. I'm not saying they're great signings, but you have to have these guys on a team. And fortunately, the Jets know who their left tackle, left guard, center, and right guard are. Let's see how they solve right tackle, whether that's in the draft or they have something else up their sleeve. But yeah, they're just solid depth signings right now that you'd rather. I think this is a better plan of offensive line depth than what Joe Douglas typically had done the last couple of years that kind of bit the Jets too often.
Stack up terrible 4th round picks and